But whenever he asked his father this most important of questions, the Shah of Blah would narrow his, to tell the truth, slightly bulging eyes, and pat his wobbly stomach, and stick his thumb between his lips, while he made ridiculous drinking noises. Glug, glug, glug. Haroun hated it when his father acted this way. "No, come on! Where do they come from, really?" he'd insist, and Rashid would wiggle his eyebrows mysteriously and make witchy fingers in the air.
"From the great story sea," he'd reply. "I drink the warm story waters, and then I feel full of steam."
Haroun found this statement intensely irritating. "Where do you keep this hot water, then?" he argued craftily. "In hot water bottles, I suppose. Well, I've never seen any."
"It comes out of an invisible tap installed by one of the water genies," said Rashid with a straight face. "You have to be a subscriber."
"And how do you become a subscriber?"
"Oh," said the Shah of Blah. "That's much too complicated to explain."
"Anyhow," said Haroun grumpily, "I've never seen a water genie either." Rashid shrugged.
"You're never up in time to see the milkman," he pointed out. "But you don't mind drinking the milk, so now kindly desist from this iffing and butting and be happy with the stories you enjoy."
And that was the end of that. Except that one day, Haroun asked one question too many, and then all hell broke loose. The Khalifas lived in the downstairs part of a small concrete house with pink walls, lime-green windows, and blue-painted balconies with squiggly metal railings, all of which made it look, in Haroun's view, more like a cake than a building. It wasn't a grand house, nothing like the skyscrapers where the super-rich folks lived. Then again, it was nothing like the dwellings of the poor, either. The poor lived in tumble-down shacks made of old cardboard boxes and plastic sheeting, and these shacks were glued together by despair. And then there were the super-poor, who had no homes at all. They slept on pavements and in the doorways of shops, and had to pay rent to local gangsters for doing even that. So the truth is that Haroun was lucky. But luck has a way of running out without the slightest warning. One minute you've got a lucky star watching over you, and the next instant it's done a bunk. In the sad city, people mostly had big families. But the poor children got sick and starved, while the rich kids overate and quarreled over their parents' money. Still, Haroun wanted to know why his parents hadn't had more children, but the only answer he ever got from Rashid was no answer at all.
"There's more to you, young Haroun Khalifa, than meets the blinking eye."
Well, what was that supposed to mean?
"We used up our full quota of child stuff just in making you," Rashid explained. "It's all packed in there, enough for maybe 4 or 5 kiddies. Yes, sir, more to you than the blinking eye can see."
Straight answers were beyond the powers of Rashid Khalifa, who would never take a shortcut if there was a longer, twistier road available. Suraya gave Haroun a simpler reply. "We tried," she sadly said. "This child business is not such an easy thing. Think of the poor Senguptas." The Senguptas lived upstairs. Mr. Sengupta was a clerk at the offices of the city corporation, and he was as sticky thin and whiny-voiced and mingy as his wife Onita was generous and loud and wobbly fat. They had no children at all, and as a result Onita Sengupta paid more attention to Haroun than he really cared for. She brought him sweet meats, which was fine, and ruffled his hair, which wasn't. And when she hugged him, the great cascades of her flesh seemed to surround him completely, to his considerable alarm. Mr. Sengupta ignored Haroun, but was always talking to Suraya, which Haroun didn't like, particularly as the fellow would launch into criticisms of Rashid the storyteller whenever he thought Haroun wasn't listening.
"That husband of yours, excuse me if I mention,"
he would start in his thin, whiny voice.
"He's got his head stuck in the air and his feet off the ground. What are all these stories? Life is not a storybook or joke shop. All this fun will come to no good. What's the use of stories that aren't even true?"
Haroun, listening hard outside the window, decided he did not care for Mr. Sengupta, this man who hated stories and storytellers. He didn't care for him one little bit. What's the use of stories that aren't even true? Haroun couldn't get the terrible question out of his head. However, there were many people who thought Rashid's stories were useful. In those days it was almost election time, and the grand pangendrams of various political parties all came to Rashid, smiling their fat cat smiles, to beg him to tell his stories at their rallies.